Adam Stolberg, and I'm an associate professor here in the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs, as well as the co-director of the Center for International Strategy, Technology, and Policy, which is the policy research arm of the Nunn School. And it is really my distinct pleasure today to co-host this luncheon panel discussion with the AAAS on this propitious moment of celebrating the anniversary of 50 years of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And with the program that we've cooked up for you today is not so much about dwelling into the empirics and the specific lessons of the crisis itself, but rather to build on the spirit of what followed in the wake of the crisis. In particular, the bold initiatives that followed after that sobering moment when the two superpowers came close to the brink and realized that they needed to make a transition from a preoccupation with mutual destruction to one on focusing on mutual survival. And so what followed in the wake of that crisis in 1962 were a series of arms control arrangements that, while they may not have been the cornerstones of cementing constructive engagement and harmony, they certainly helped to create a roadmap for coordinating and regulating the competition so things didn't go so off the rails again. But another product of that August moment was an opportunity for the worlds of science and technology to come together with the world of social science and policy. And the fruits, which were the arms control agreements that were cemented during that period of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, really represented the fruits of labor of bringing those two worlds together to tackle tough real-world problems with high consequence. Today, when we look over the horizon, we see we're also in a very challenging moment. In many ways, our leaders in our both within the nuclear weapon states and the non-nuclear weapon states, are not just talking the talk of envisioning a world free of nuclear weapons, but really trying to put more substance to these visions. And in many ways, our leaders are outstripping our analytical frameworks and our technologies in some ways. And so we're in a very challenging moment where we have lofty ambitions. We have still a number of issues from the Cold War that haven't been settled, and we see a number of the arms control agreements that were reached towards the end of that period sort of hitting a period of difficulty. Yet we have these bold visions, and there are many other opportunities with globalization taking foot, new information technologies that we saw in the Middle East most recently. It is engaging new communities and constituencies. There's a lot going on in the worlds of science and technology, and certainly in the worlds of policy. And so, in the spirit of the wake of the Cuban Missile Crisis, we wanted to bring together some of the practitioners, those people who are really at the nub of the intersection of science and technology, specifically as they bear on high consequence issues such as nuclear arms control today. And we're very fortunate today to have two very senior officials, one from the United States and one is an international diplomat, that are really tasked with these issues. And our first speaker today will be Dr. William Kohlblaser, who was appointed in July 2011 as the 4th Science and Technology Advisor to the U.S. Secretary of State. And he brings a long career in the field of international security, where he's really been working at the forefront of linking science and U.S. foreign policy, but specifically U.S. diplomacy, and how science and technology can be marshaled to advance U.S. interests abroad, and also how diplomacy can be used to further the progress of science and technology. So he's going to be able to talk generally about that intersection and how it advances U.S. foreign policy, and specifically also in the nuclear realm. Our other speaker is the Executive Secretary of the Preparatory Commission of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization. And he's been in that position since 1995. And for those of you who don't know about the CTBTO, It is the UN body tasked with promoting and monitoring the compliance with the Comprehensive Test Ban, which actually bans all nuclear explosions. A hallmark piece of diplomatic legislation, if you will, that is not yet in force, but is a very prominent one with many signatories. And among his illustrious highlights of his career, his diplomatic career, is a Hungarian diplomat, the diplomat to the UN in Geneva and the Council on Disarmament, the IAEA. One of the distinctive features of Ambassador Todt is that he really has had a tremendous experience working across the different WMD technologies in a very senior international diplomatic role. So he's been steeped in not only the diplomacy of these issues, but the different technologies, the chemical, biological, and nuclear. He also is a Hungarian diplomat at a very interesting moment, because he not only straddled these different technologies, he personally straddled the diplomatic challenges of transitioning from the Cold War to the post-Cold War. And so it's with our great pleasure that we're able to co-host this. But as I just mentioned, we are co-hosting this. And we're doing this together with the AAAS. And my partner in arms here is Vaughn Tarikian. And Vaughn is the Chief International Officer of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Vaughn, and he holds many hats in that regard. One is he's the editor of a new journal, Science Diplomacy, and there are a number of copies that are available for people if they care to pick it up on the way out. He's also served as a special assistant to the Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs, so he is not only working in the NGO world, but he has had experience working in government as well. And before I turn it over to our two speakers, I'd like to invite Vaughn maybe to give a few opening remarks.
Thank you. I'm going to be very quick. I know you guys didn't know what you were getting into when you sat down and actually had sandwiches. You thought you were going to just get two good talks instead of me and Adam up here sort of doing our little spiel. But I'll just put into perspective, AAAS is, as Adam mentioned, the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And one of the programs that we have is a whole issue of science diplomacy. And the basis of that is how can scientists, actually work together across some boundaries where there's some difficulties. It's interesting, as I was walking in, I saw a sign that said, Cuban Missile Crisis this way, which sort of seemed like an interesting sign, but
we're lacking materials.
Yeah, exactly. it's a tabletop exercise. The interesting thing, though, is having gone to Cuba a number of times, one of the most striking things when you go is how close it is. And how close it is to the U.S. You literally, when you fly, you take off from Miami, and by the time you even reach altitude, you start coming down again. And in that time, one of the things you notice very quickly is this enormous building. I mean, just huge, big, huge compound. I mean, I would say almost like this stadium, but not as beautiful. I'm a University of Virginia PhD, and I came down here for a couple games. UVA actually lost every one of those games. I've been in this stadium crying, drinking and crying maybe at the same time. But it's something, a large compound, and you realize it was the Soviet embassy, and that Soviet embassy was 90 miles off the shore of the United States, looking north, listening to all these things, and just the amount of activity that's taking place 50 years ago. We're really, and you know, I wasn't around that. I maybe looked like I could have been, but I wasn't. But every story you hear is about just how close the world came to a real nuclear war at that time. And you read books about it. You read some stories about it, and some terrible Kevin Costner movies that relate to it. But you really do see that this is. But the amazing thing, again, from a scientific standpoint, is it's 90 miles away. Every single fish species that goes into the Gulf of Mexico actually spawns in that area, the warm current, which actually starts in the Florida Straits. So that distance, which was the distance that almost caused direct nuclear catastrophe, is also a distance where we share so many resources, which is where this whole issue of science and diplomacy and the pursuit of peace and prosperity is actually really important. And the role that science can play in bringing people together and bridging, especially with a country where it turns out that 50 years ago we were on the verge of having a platform for nuclear annihilation taking place with the Soviets. So anyway, I sort of leave on that philosophical note, but But it's a real pleasure. It is such a pleasure to be down here at Georgia Tech and being part of this. My wife's family lives up in Roswell, and I don't ever really know where I'm going when I'm there. I just know I just sort of swing past Georgia Tech on the way there and see what a beautiful place it is. So it's really nice to be back here. I come actually every Christmas. So thanks. With that, Bill.
So let me thank both Adam and Vaughn. It's a pleasure to be here today, especially to talk to a large group of students. Let me tell you a little bit about my career, wayward path, going from a theoretical physicist into working on sort of the role of science technology in diplomacy, and also the role of non-governmental organizations in contributing to improving relations between countries using science and technology. My role at the State Department, actually I've only been inside the government for a year, so I've mostly been a non-governmental person. But the Science Technology Advisor Office in the Department of State, the role is to try to help use science technology for diplomatic purposes, for strengthening relations between the United States and other countries, for dealing with issues that affect relations between countries, which affect the United States' strategic interests, also to help bring more human capacity inside the State Department to deal with science and technology. Almost every issue that affects the world today, there's a very important component that deals with science. One of the pleasures of my job actually is being oversight for several fellowship programs that bring bright young scientists and engineers to work in the State Department. So I really wanted to advertise that in my remarks today. The largest one is actually managed through the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the AAAS fellowship program. Roughly this year, I think there are 250 that are in various agencies of the government, including the Congress and the State Department. There are roughly 40, and USAID 40. And over time, so the program's been in existence for a number of decades. In fact, I was a AAAS fellow working for Congress back in the mid-1970s. There are roughly 60 former fellows who are now permanent employees inside the State Department. So the human capacity to deal with science technology has been greatly increased by these programs that bring bright young and mid-career people to come and work there. Well, back at the time, I was old enough to be around when the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred. I was actually a freshman at Caltech in October of 1962, the Georgia Tech of the West Coast. And it was actually a very scary time for those of us who were students there, as well as people all over the country who weren't quite sure what was going to come from it. Later in my career, I spent time at the Kennedy School at Harvard in a center called the Center for Science and International Affairs, called the Belfer Center. And another thing I wanted to advertise, the head of the Belfer Center now is a professor named Graham Allison. He wrote one of the seminal books analyzing decision-making during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the Belfer Center has put up, I think, a great website in honor of the 50th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's CubanMissileCrisis.org. But it actually is a very careful timeline, not only of the crisis, but all through the Cold War, all the issues that occurred actually during those days in May of October 1962, as well as what diplomats, what academics and others have to say about what are the lessons that come from this crisis. I think one thing we have learned that it was probably even more dangerous than we thought at the time, which is kind of scary. It also shows the importance of our leaders in decision making and have people at the top who ultimately are trusted with making wise decisions for our society. So we were very lucky in October of 1962. In the last 50 years that we've avoided the use of nuclear weapons. Well, anyway, I was a theoretical physicist, but I was always, in fact, many of my professors, for those who were young men and women, had been involved in the Manhattan Project, and so they had been involved in the development of nuclear weapons. And so they also knew what the risks and challenges were for this new technology which they had helped to create. So many of them spent a fair amount of time in their careers later in life in trying to contribute to how do we control this threat to humanity. So I had a number of wonderful mentors who I think contributed as much to trying to make the world a more peaceful and stable place as they did to science. And it was all in part because of this experience that brought them into considering the implications of the technologies that they had developed. I want to mention one, in part because he died this past year, and I think he's a very good illustration of what scientists and engineers outside of government can contribute. His name is Paul Dodi. He was a world-famous biochemist at Harvard University. He was on President Kennedy's Science Advisory Committee in the 1960s, and he had been involved as a very young man also in the Manhattan Project. And through that experience, he decided he was going to devote that portion of his time not doing science to try and improve connections between American scientists and Soviet scientists dealing with nuclear weapons issues. He did that partly through an organization called Pugwash. He also did it through collaboration between the U.S. National Academy of Sciences and the Soviet Academy of Sciences. He did that all of his career. During the 1980s, at the height of the Cold War, the main back-channel communication between American and Soviet scientists was actually through the two academies of the two countries. And they used those back-channel communication dialogues to really talk about the issues associated with controlling nuclear weapons. And sometimes we're very fortunate in history where windows of opportunity emerge, where these channels of communication that occur actually in very difficult times can actually have enormous influence when there is a window of opportunity. And in this case, it turned out when Gorbachev became head of the Soviet Union, many of the Soviet scientists Americans were dealing with actually became Gorbachev's chief scientific advisors. So the conversations that occurred in the back-channel dialogues actually had great influence on governmental policy. To give you some other examples of how scientists outside of the government and academics, and I hope all of you, no matter what you do in your career, that you might be able to contribute in this way as well, can help the work to strengthen connections between countries. Right now, science technology is a great asset for American diplomacy. There's several reasons for that, but the primary one is that every country around the world right now, regardless of whether or not governmental relations are good or bad with the United States, they all want to engage with scientists and engineers in the United States. They still view the United States as the world leader in science and technology. Also, through everyone recognizes now that science is globalized through the information and computer revolution, that the world is globally connected. And most countries, governments in particular, recognize that if they're going to be able to ensure a prosperous future for their citizens, they're going to have to compete at a higher level in science technology, connect science technology innovation, connected to economic development in the marketplace. And so how they become better in science technology, well, their number one goal is to engage more with scientists and engineers in the United States. So right now, science and technology is actually a good news story for American diplomats when they're engaging and talking with countries around the world. Even on trying to talk about issues where things may be very difficult, they find they're always eager to start the conversation talking about science and technology cooperation with the United States. My only regret is because of all of the requests that come from other countries to increase engagement with the U.S., with countries putting forward even their own resources to cover their side, that on our side, I think we should put a whole lot more money. I think it's really in our interest in trying to become globally engaged with countries that are really eager to do that with the U.S. But talking about what non-governmental organizations have done more recently in strengthening relations between countries, even in very difficult situations, I want to highlight the AAAS role. Juan and his Center for Science Diplomacy at the AAAS, they have dialogues with North Korea. They started with Burma before relations actually improved recently. They attempted to do it with Syria. The U.S. National Academy of Sciences, I spent 20 years of my life at the U.S. National Academy of Sciences overseeing the studies of experts that are put together to study all kinds of issues. And the U.S. Academy of Sciences with the Iranian Academy of Sciences for over a decade is engaged in dialogues, not on nuclear issues in this case, but things dealing with the environment, dealing with earthquake protection, dealing with the health issues. And during that decade, I would always meet in each administration with people in the State Department to ask, do you want us to continue engaging what is called track 2 diplomacy, engaging in dialogues outside of government channels? And the word always was, yes, definitely, we want to make sure that there are these communication channels, even when things are in very difficult straits. The hope is that when, perhaps there will be windows of opportunity that occur in the future when these dialogues between the scientific community of the two countries can have an influence in trying to move things in a productive direction. Also, the Academy of Sciences, we heard this morning, and I mentioned the role of Paul Dodi. The committee of the Academy of Sciences that works on these issues is called the Committee on International Security and Arms Control. It has had dialogues not only with the Soviets and then with Russian scientists for over 20 years with scientists and engineers in China, also talking about nuclear weapons and arms control issues, with scientists and engineers in India, attempted to try to do it in Pakistan as well. And these dialogues, even again, when relations go up and down between the countries, these dialogues have continued during all of that time. And I think they're extremely important for the government to have these mechanisms by which all of the assets of the United States society, our universities, our foundations, our companies can be engaged in the overall task of trying to move things in the right direction to have a more secure and prosperous future for all of the world's citizens. The last thing I might mention, or I'll talk briefly again about the government, is the importance also of scientists and engineers who are willing to serve on advisory committees, both for the government as well as those with non-governmental organizations that deal with issues like arms control. In the State Department, I work with a very creative and able Undersecretary, Rose Gottemüller, who is the Undersecretary that deals with arms control and with verification and monitoring of arms control treaties. She's not only a very good negotiator, she's the person who negotiated the New START treaty, but she's also, I think, very visionary in thinking of the applications of new technologies to address some of the challenges that we face in her own area. She's been in the forefront in the government of using what's called open challenges, even using applications of social media that might be applied to some of the challenges of monitoring and verifying treaties, using crowdsourcing, for example, doing experiments that might turn out to provide more information. And these types of approaches, I think, are also very good for engaging young people. Using the current open challenge that her office has right now, the prize is small, only $10,000, but it's for people to come up with ideas that might be very useful in terms of social media applications. That might be very useful for verifying arms control and international agreements. And so it'll be very instructive to see what kind of interesting ideas come. It's going to come, I think, my view, is going to come from students as much as it's going to come from people who are further along in their careers. So anyway, I think the main message that I would like to leave with you is, one, the responsibility of everyone, no matter what your career is, to help engage on these issues if you feel you can make a contribution, the importance of the role of the non-governmental side, as well as also the utility of going and working in government. For those of you you might be interested in the AAAS fellowships, for example, if you would like to get a taste of what it's like to work in the government, applying your science and technical knowledge to the areas related to international relations and diplomacy. Serving on committees of the National Academy of Sciences when you become a distinguished professor at a university. Those committees actually deal with many of these issues. Like I mentioned, the Committee on International Security and Arms Control has been working at this for more than 30 years. So there are many different ways that you can contribute to, I think, what is a very important task for all of us to undertake. So anyway, it's great to be with you. Last year I had a visit at the State Department by a very bright group of students from Georgia Tech. It was a very interesting dialogue. They're all graduate students actually working on these kind of problems. Actually, when I go back to the State Department on Friday, I just got a message last night that there's a group of freshmen from Georgia Tech who are coming to the State Department. So I'll also get a chance to see them. Thank you again. It's great to be with you today.
Sorry for that. Sorry.
There's a slide on iTunes right at the end if you want.
I just received the indications about another slide I should show to you. The reason I will be showing slides, and this is a last-minute adjustment, I discovered with a very positive note how many young faces are there here in the room. Let me first of all start with expressing my real appreciation to colleagues who are listening for the 6th time in 30 hours to me. I made the point yesterday at the evening after talk number 4 that I'm really sorry. I made the point that probably there is voices, and that's me. This morning Adam added one more talk compared to the planned ones, and this is talk number 6. But I'm really happy to have you here in the room. And let me reveal something which I mentioned yesterday and this morning in the absence of the many young faces in this room. I was speaking about the right side of the brain. So there is a theory that your generation is relying more on the right side of the brain compared to the left side of the brain. For your information, right side is all right, okay? It's creative, it's connecting the dots, it's tuning in more to video games, internet, social media, and remembering those things very well. So I came across a number that 2,500 slides were shown to young people, and after 7 days they could remember 90% of all that. I don't have all the 2,500, I have 6 of them, and I would like to ask you to remember all of them in not just 7 days, but in 7 years or 70 years, okay? The angle I'm coming from is killer applications, to stay with the video games and with software, killer applications. One killer application is nuclear explosions, practically demonstrating the worst forces mankind unleashed. The Tsar bomb, which was detonated back in 1961, a 100 megaton weapon. It was detonated at half of the power. It represented at 50 megaton 4,000 times the destructive power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. At that time, when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, beyond this type of weapon, there were more than 5,000 weapons around. And this is a killer application. The other killer application I'm coming from with my organization and the treaty, the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, is the worst forces nature and man can release. These are man-made and natural coming in a tragic event together, like it happened March last year, an earthquake and the Fukushima nuclear accident. So practically, my organization is working at the intersection, the worst man, leashed and unleashed, and the second is the worst forces nature. The background for this talk is extremely important. So we are sitting through the 50th anniversary memories. And what is striking, I was listening this morning, everyone knows where I was standing, I was sitting, what I was doing. It's remarkable. I was listening this morning, yesterday I heard. And you do not remember. And it's very difficult for you to have the right empathy. And it's very difficult for us to explain to you how complex it was. I remember myself, I was 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table, and my parents were discussing something like thermonuclear war, which I didn't understand. But this was the phrase used in the communications back on the 26th of October 1962. Later I understood what was discussed was the Cuban Missile Crisis, but it came much later. So it's important that you try to get the right empathy for what happened then. Why? There was this reference that direction, Cuban Missile Crisis in this room, but you have an exit from this room. So you can stand up and walk out of this room. And this was not possible for anyone back in late October 1962. Collectively, in the room of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then everyone was stuck there. What is very striking, not just my memories, but recently I came across the memories of Jacqueline Kennedy as reflected back in 1964. So it was 2 years after the crisis, very vivid memories. Depicted by Sorensen, where she said, I walked over to the president and I told him, I would like to die next to you and the children too. So this is how much everyone was stuck in the room of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and there was no exit from the room. So we will need the future room with a big exit door as well. And here we should go back from 26th and 27th of October 1962, because it did not start on even 10 days or mid-September 1962. And from the point of view of the test ban, I would like to quickly refer that the notion of the prohibition of nuclear weapon tests, pushing the genie back in the bottle, was born in 1954. You might ask what the hell you are doing, bureaucrats. So it's 2012 and still the genie is not fully pushed back in the bottle. I can come back to that. But in 1954, President Nehru of India suggested it. It was 8 years before midnight. If I can use the notion of the doomsday clock, you might remember what it is about. 8 years before midnight, it was done. Not 8 minutes, 8 years. And there were many, many discussions, and there were many give and take, and many fancy arguments why it didn't work, why the verification didn't work, why it did not work as a measure. And there were many proposals. Even in the summer of 1962, there were 2 proposals put on the table of the negotiating table in the summer, still 3-4 months before midnight, where US, UK suggested or a partial or a comprehensive test ban. It was not possible. And then the complexity of different events happened. The complexity of the resumption of the tests after a moratorium, and the resumption happened with, among others, with this Tsar bomb. And things were spinning out of control. Things were spinning out of control where it's quite clear by now that there was no one really in control. So it was sheer-luck. But then what happened on the 26th of October, in the second letter of the second Khrushchev letter, let's call it like that, among other solutions, it was proposed that there should be a test ban treaty. This was not 8 years before midnight, it was not 8 months before midnight, it was not 8 days before midnight, it was 1 minute before midnight. And on the 27th of October, there was a positive response by the president, who showed a lot of leadership, I must say, during those days, who embraced what was embraceable, especially from the first letter of Khrushchev, and embraced the notion of the test ban. And the question is, why 1 minute to midnight some of these solutions are coming to the mind of all leaders? Why it did not come again 8 months or 8 years beforehand? And this is a lesson we have to take away, and you will have to take away the lesson, because I later learned that what happened in October 1962 was the Cuban Missile Crisis. You might not know what will be the equivalent of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And of course, all of us should say, no, it will not happen. Bad things are happening to others, in other places, at other times. But 50 years later, we have to assess in a sober way, where are we now? And to assess in a sober way where are we now, let me mention 2 numbers, and it's with a lot of simplification. The number of weapons we have right now, still with all the trend coming down from the peak, 3 times higher than the number of weapons during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was above 5,000, and we have below 20,000 nuclear weapons around. And there are 3 times more nations who are possessing nuclear weapons. So if I try to apply the mathematics of a diplomat, 3 times 3, the complexity is 9 times higher. And it's a simplification, okay? But you could use it as a rule of thumb. But what we have 50 years later, and this is your word and our word together, what we have 50 years later, we are trying to handle certain challenges. And the segment I'm trying to handle with all the good people, Jean Dupré is one of them, and many colleagues and many nations, is again to push the genie of nuclear tests back in the bottle. And let me show you something which is an application. This is a segment of nuclear test explosions starting somewhere in 1958. There is a calm down in 1958 in terms of nuclear explosions. There is a moratorium for nearly 3 years between 58 and 61. And then what you will see is a resumption of nuclear explosions. And if you would like to make comparisons, we are at a crossroad right now, because it might be that we are in a moratorium type of situation, and if you do not consolidate that moratorium, and if you don't seal the genie of nuclear explosions pushed back in the bottle, what might happen is what happened from 1961. More than 250 explosions in 17 months, more in 17 months than in the preceding 17 years. And this was one of the important catalysts for the situation running out of control. So I hope that you will be able to. And I do not want to make the point that these are nuclear explosions, test explosions, but it's a reminder about what could have happened if the Cuban Missile Crisis went wrong. This is the moratorium. So again, this is a segment. This is like 200 plus nuclear explosions. Some of them were the 50 megaton Tsar bomb. And again, I do not want to stretch the point as far. Imagine what would have happened with more than 5,000 nuclear weapons and the Cuban Missile Crisis really spinning out of control. The solutions. Okay, I managed probably to scare ourselves to the right level of concern. Let me try to speak a bit about where we are going from here. One way of moving forward is to focus our mind not just on the peak. I just showed you the peak. These are nuclear tests, nuclear explosions, historically speaking. You just showed the absence of tests in between 58 and 61, and you show the peak. And you can still see on this graph the other 400-500 nuclear explosions each and every decade. All those nuclear explosions were a pollutant, politically speaking and environmentally speaking. I would like to focus your mind on the right hand of this slide, where practically, virtually, the genie is back in the bottle. And virtually because only North Korea carried out two nuclear explosions during the last 10 years. And we have to seal the genie in the bottle. And we are trying to do our best by lining up nations behind the treaty. By now we have 157 countries who ratified the treaty. And by doing what is depicted here, I hope I am showing, this is a global monitoring system listening to sinister footsteps, meaning listening to potential nuclear explosions. And it's a fire detector or smoke detector because it's picking up radionuclide number as a potential release of nuclear explosions. This is what I call a joint venture of the international community to make sure that what is written in the law is to be implemented. All that investment, political and scientific and financial, can help. But it can help only in case countries and leaders of the countries understand that it's better to do things 8 years before the doomsday clock comes to midnight, or even 8 months before doomsday clock comes to midnight. And just a reminder to the complexity leaders face, of course, this is a map with green showing which countries subscribed to the test ban treaty by ratification. This is a map with green showing those countries who, I should call it, have an insurance policy right now through adding more cooperative arrangements. More cooperative arrangements, not reaching out for them on the 26th of October, a couple of hours before midnight, but right now. And there is a writing on this wall. And the writing on this wall is gray and turquoise. With gray and turquoise are those countries which have not ratified the treaty, which believe that this insurance policy is not needed. It's not needed now. This insurance policy can be replaced by relying more on the mix of nuclear deterrence, nuclear weapons, and other means than diplomacy and cooperative arrangements. There is a reason why some of the countries are missing. I cannot go into all the nuances. I can lead you through if you are interested. But there is a writing on this wall. And the writing on this wall, then the next Cuban Missile Crisis can happen in any of those places. And especially Middle East and Asia, be it South Asia, East Asia, or other parts of Asia, are very much predominantly on this map. The additional complexity, and I don't have the time for that, is acceleration. There is a notion of singularity, whether you might or you might not believe in the speed of singularity. Singularity means that as a result of technological progress, which is accelerating exponentially accelerating. So what used to be 50 years is 25 years, 12 years, 6 years, 3 years, 1.5 years, and 9 months with each and every cycle of acceleration. And this is where we are moving on the technologies as a result of IT developments, artificial intelligence, robotics, and all these developments. So this notion of singularity and acceleration is a reminder that it might be less than 8 years available to try to add again the software tools to the toolbox, not waiting until the 26th of October, 1 hour before midnight. As for the complexity, I am from Hungary. I hope you will remember for 70 years Rubik's Cube, okay? This is the commercial part of it, a fellow Hungarian. I am using the Rubik's Cubes to demonstrate to you that we have quite a number of issues to focus on beyond the test ban treaty. And just take a classical matrix, one side of this cube. On the vertical side of it, imagine ABC, A nuclear, B biological, C chemical. Okay, ABC is quite simple. On the horizontal, imagine letter S's. One S is stocks, weapons. Second S is what is called safeguards. This is the non-misuse of dual-use technologies. And the third S is a double S, what is called safety and security, to make sure that there is no accidental or inadvertent use of some of the dangerous forces. If you open another dimension, the third dimension, and this is the Rubik's Cube, then you can add different layers of challenges. It can be a national level, it can be a level of terrorists, the subnational level, and it could be individuals, like we saw with the biological substances, individuals who did the wrong thing. This three-dimensional matrix of challenges represents 27 moving parts of this cube, Rubik's Cube of weapons of mass destruction challenges, 27. I have another version of this cube. Why? Because there are more than 3 categories. One could add the delivery systems, one could add E, A, B, C, D, delivery, E for electronic cyber, and F, fissile material if you wish. So I can go down the alphabet, and we might very easily end up with 10 on the vertical side, easily 10 on the horizontal side, and 10 more challenges on the third dimension, which means 1,000 moving components. And the complexity of this cube of challenges is that the whole system is as strong as its weakest link, if you understand what I'm trying to say. As strong, the whole system, as its weakest link. And this is the challenge I'm throwing at you, the next generation. I call them nexperts, copyrighted, okay? And the challenge is, it can be taken care of. Don't believe that it's too much overwhelming, be it with the 27 moving parts or with the 1,000 moving parts. It's doable. But it requires attention, and it requires a systemic approach. It requires you focusing on that. And since I'm moving to the positive notion, I will try to show, okay, this is the 1,000 moving parts. But it's doable. And we need two things. One is a very systemic approach to all of the 1,000 boxes, to all of the 1,000 moving parts of it. And what we need is force multipliers. Force multipliers, and I can explain what I mean by force multipliers. Force multipliers from the practice of what we are trying to do as an organization, where we are trying to make it manageable, number one, through education. To make it manageable, where we are, as an international organization, trying to use the most advanced methodology, MOOCs, massive online open courses. We are enrolling 1,000 people this year. If you are inspired by this talk, here to sign up for the November course. 1,000 people, 3 times the size of the organization. If you translate it into UN system numbers, 500,000 people per year educated substantially in a deep way on different issues of global challenges, because this is of the 50 different areas. So number one, this massive education. Number two, we would like to move from just the massive education to what I describe as edu-action, education and action. Again, copyrighted, that's me, okay. Edu-action. Edu-action meaning to let people do things in terms of solutions. So it's not just you enrolling in a course of hours, but be part of the solution from the very beginning. And we have a couple of people who are coming mid-November to Vienna. Can I ask them to just to at least raise their hands if some of them are here? So you see, like, that's good. 4/5 of the team is here. That's good. So they are coming over, And what we are trying to do is to give them concrete assignments where on issues which matter for the build-up of the system I showed to you, they can be part of the solution. 5 can make a difference, 500 can make a bigger difference, 5,000 can make a real difference. And it's possible because we are at 1,000 participants of the courses right now. I would like to add one more notion, again, playing around with the word education. And this is something brand new, even Jean, you didn't hear it. Lead education, leadership. We need leadership. I don't think it's enough to talk up issues or to talk up solutions or to have a bottom-up approach to solutions. We need the leadership which came just in time on 26th, 27th of October, just 1 hour before midnight. And we have to learn the lesson about lead education. So leaders will have to lead. And there is a possibility to lead us, not just inside rooms, but to find exit as well. Let me finish with the right side of the brain. It's describing, again, the creative side of the brain. It's describing the side of the brain which is enabling you as the right-siders. You are the right-siders, okay? Enabling you to be creative, enabling you to connect the dots, enabling you to see the bigger pictures. So we have to see the bigger picture, and you have to come down on the right side of solutions as well. Thank you so much for your attention.
I'd like to invite questions from the floor for our two speakers. Any right-siders? Please. State your name and your affiliation.
My name is John Patrick Floyd. I'm a nuclear engineering student, CISTP. Given the political changes in the Middle East and also the current political race in the United States, has there been any mention in the United States in the political race, or maybe in Egypt, of action on the CTBT in order to try to get it out? Has there been any talk about that?
Certainly in the U.S. government, there's great interest perhaps after the election to see if there's another opportunity to take the treaty to the Senate. But I think everything is not being discussed until after the election to see if there is that opportunity.
Let me take up the other part of it. The challenge I see is there was a map. I called it writing on the wall. Of course, it's a writing on the wall for the whole international community, that things can go wrong. And again, if the software tools of cooperative diplomacy, cooperative security are not there, it might be too late to ask for it, the 1 hour before midnight type of moment. And this is an issue for the Middle East as well. I don't think that anyone can impose the software tools upon countries. They are sovereign, they are responsible for their own security. But the message is that if historically you look back, there is a role for these software tools, the cooperative security tools. And it's only in case countries embrace that notion, their leaders embrace that notion, countries can step down what I call on the escalation ladder. Escalation of articulation, of challenges, and trying to move to solutions. This morning I mentioned in the closed meeting that if you take the Middle East, we created what I call a big tent of an organization, 183 members, but we have more than 2/3 of the Middle East countries right now as ratifiers of the treaty. Okay, we don't have a ratification for Israel, Iran, Egypt, but at least they are signatories, at least they are sitting there. And they are practicing on a daily basis what is called cooperative security. So they learn that, yes, it's possible to sit in the same room yes, it's possible to talk about political issues and security issues and underlying science and technology and the system. And it went as far as February last year. We had an infrasound calibration experiment on the territory of Israel with the participation of countries from the Middle East. It was a wider experiment, but it included many of the countries from the region. And this is an opportunity for the countries of the Middle East to move in this direction. Not necessarily like right away asking for a ink cartridge, political ink cartridge where to ratify type of action, but moving slowly. Iran could switch on its monitoring stations, which are not switched on. Iran could resume or pay its SS contribution to building this system. They could ratify. Israel can ratify the treaty. Israel is not raising major difficulties with the treaty. But again, this is up to the countries. I don't think any bureaucracy, any blue-eyed naive bureaucrat like myself can impose upon countries. But again, think about the 26th of October. Last moment, suddenly, the test ban treaty was discovered.
Yes, please.
John Madroni, I'm on the staff here at Georgia Tech. Would you talk a minute about Iran? If I put myself in their shoes and all my enemies have nuclear weapons, it would seem reasonable to me I should know.
Jean, can we bring back the map? Can you bring back the map? What you say is relevant not just for Iran, but for many other countries as well. And yesterday I made the point, this morning made a point about that Pakistan can refer to India, India can refer to China, China can refer to the United States or Russia, whatever is the choice, and the US can ratify to a number of countries. So the question is how we turn this vicious circle, I wouldn't call it virtuous circle, but something which is moving us away from a downward spiraling, where there is better and better argumentation found why not to move in this direction. And once there is a big crisis, then there is a wake-up call. And this is what happened in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Adam mentioned that at the introduction, that there was a runaway period of arms control verification and disarmament. Why it happened? Because leaders were scared. They were not scared enough to have a comprehensive nuclear test ban treaty, because after a couple of months, it became less scary. Okay, it was like, okay, we could handle it, and there were different argumentation and explanations why it is not realistic, why it was not realistic at that time to have a comprehensive treaty. And I'm sure that Iran, I know some of the arguments, I do not want to deploy the arguments, they are making the point that, look, we would like to do that, but this is not the right moment, or confidence building measures were not reciprocated, and there could be different arguments replicated by me. And there are arguments from the other side. Israel concerned very much, other countries are concerned, but we have to find a way out, okay? And here my normal reference point is the financial crisis. So imagine that we are as much a regulator as there were national and international regulators who were seeing very clearly that things are unfolding in the wrong way. It did not happen September 2008 that the writing emerged on the wall. But there was a feeling that, look, it's too difficult. It's too difficult to go back to more regulations, or it's too difficult to add more regulation, or it's even too difficult to prevent the regulation disappearing, what happened in 1999 on the financial things. There was a feeling that we can manage it. There was a feeling that it's a bit of an irrational exuberance, but it's manageable. So I can cite all the 8 countries' arguments why it is difficult, why it is not realistic, why they are waiting for the other side. But as much as with trade, with currency, or it's cooperative, or whatever gain one country is trying to do will bring less trade, less stability on currency, and less stability on security if it is done in a non-cooperative way. And the lesson is not there. That's why I coined the notion of lead-education. So we need this message sinking in at a very high level of decision makers, and I'm not speaking about one person or one part of a system, but yes, the complex layers of systems where these issues are defined. Does it sound naive? Yes. Could it happen that we wake up again? I hope not.
Schuster, chemistry. So in the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy traded away the Jupiter missiles in Turkey and Italy for the cooperation of Khrushchev in withdrawing the missiles from Cuba. And if we run that forward to the present day, what are the possible trade-offs to help Iran feel more secure in their position in the Middle East?
I hope it's a question to Bill. Bill, please.
Well, actually, before I went in the government, as I think I mentioned, I had the opportunity to go to Iran twice as part of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences dialogue with the Iranian Academy and Sharif University, which is their large scientific and technological university. And although most of our dialogues with the Iranian scientific community were not on nuclear issues, they were on other topics. We did have some meetings with high-level government officials and heard at great lengths sort of the perspective of Iran on these issues and the neighborhood that it lives in and some of the challenges that they face, and also in the recent history between Iran and Iraq and going back to the 1950s with the United States. So they certainly can make a strong case of why that they're perhaps nervous about their own security arrangements. I still believe, and this is personally not speaking for the U.S. government at all, that between the U.S. and Iran, that there are many things in common, I think, in what we want to achieve in the world. And so to me, it seems like it's certainly possible to reach an accommodation on this issue. I know certainly in Iran, there's certainly different power structures, domestic debates and dialogues. Not only is there an election in the U.S., there's going to be another election in Iran. I think over the longer term, if we can avoid what is now probably one of the most dangerous periods in the relationship, if we can get through that, I think that there are enough common interests that there are solutions to some of the current issues right now. And so I'm very hopeful that the people on both sides who are doing the negotiating can come up with the right answers. Iran is a country that is, its people have valued education. They have very bright students. Again, as I indicated, all the ones that I met in the 2 trips I made to Iran, they're very eager to engage with the United States. A lot of their students want to come to graduate school in the United States. The large Iranian diaspora communities in the U.S. So I think that there are pieces to the puzzle in place that could actually lead to a very positive outcome. Of course, there are others that make it a real challenge. But I think it is certainly one of the most important issues that we have today in this engagement dealing between the United States and Iran. Well, with all the countries, the European countries and the U.S. in this negotiations with Iran.
John Swigel from the Savannah River National Laboratory. Ambassador Toff, I'm curious if you've had an opportunity to visualize if you were to achieve entry into force of the treaty, what the broad outline of your agenda going forward would be at that point.
If you ask broad in the sense of beyond the test ban treaty,
Beyond achievement of EIN, yeah.
Beyond the entry into force of the treaty, of course, for the treaty itself, entry into force is not an end station. So there is a need to make sure that the law which we brought in force is respected. And for that, you need a continued vigilance. You need a system which is, again, listening to the sinister potential footsteps and the fire detection device and on-site inspection. And all these things should be functioning as an alarm system. It cannot function if the aggregate will of the permanent members of the Security Council is not following up if there is a potential breach. And it's not just implementation, it's a deterrence as well. The way through this aggregate field of the Security Council, the international community is taking this rule seriously or not so seriously will be defining for this whole arrangement. We can spend another $1 billion on this system if this wheel is not there in a clear manner. I mentioned this morning that the way the system functions is a democratic involvement of all the countries from the moment of verification data is gathered. Verification data is processed in an absolutely transparent way and distributed. This is new. Why it is important? It's not just because of the permanent members of the Security Council, but if there is a Security Council discussion, no country, non-permanent members can say, look, we don't know what happened. We hear some information from you, but we have doubts about that. And because of that, we do not want to speak out. So that's important for the future. If we go beyond the narrow realm of the test ban treaty and the arrangement, then what would be needed, of course, very much a continuation of what was started by the New START treaty, deeper cuts, involvement of other nuclear weapon states, no question. Of course, addressing the wider spectrum of non-strategic, sub-strategic assets as well. It would be important, and I emphasized yesterday as well, fissile materials. So while the stockpiles are being diminished, we have to pay more and more attention to the other side of the equation. And if the fissile material, which is produced for peaceful purposes, is increasing significantly, and let me share with you a number which might be a high-end number. MIT made an assessment that by 2050, gigawatt electric, we might move to 1,500 gigawatt electric, a doubling of each 20 years, not excluded in nuclear technology. And heavy reliance on reprocessing, plutonium economy combined with light water reactors. And the annual production of reprocessed plutonium is 1,000 ton under that scenario. 1,000 ton plutonium is the equivalent of nearly 200,000 nuclear warheads. And I don't want to speculate about the proliferation problems. Just take the security and the safety, the last two S's I had on this, the simplified version of the Rubik's Cube. So what kind of challenge it is representing, even in terms of statistically type of category of fissile material, and how far we are ready to move away from a period which was defined by weaponized, stockpiled assets, and where we might be moving to something which is a totally new world. And by the way, there is a similar situation unfolding with the chemical weapons as well. Still, we are not there in terms of the destruction of chemical weapons where we should be, but there is a 75% destruction behind us, 25% is remaining, and the question is, would the significance of the potential misuse of the industrial and other assets lead to a breakout situation? And we will have to focus more on that. So fissile material as well, the non-misuse of the industrial and other assets. By the way, it's as much true for the bio, ABC. So you have to keep in mind ABC, and you have to keep in mind the weakest link. And when you think about B, keep in mind it might be one of the weakest link. and keep in mind the acceleration and the singularity vis-a-vis the B as well. So on the nuclear issues, I think we have quite a couple of issues. The problem is, as I project the speed with which we move, and as I see the technical progress and advancement, I'm getting concerned. Okay, and yesterday I was citing in a talk Gerard O'Neill. In '81 he published a work. He was looking back on how technological and scientific progress projected, materialized, and how in the humanities, in the social science area, projections about progress materialized. And it happened that in the scientific area, all those projections were underestimated. So the progress was quicker eventually than the projection. And it happened the other way around. On the social sciences, all the time we turned out for the last 300 years more optimistic compared where we got in the next 10, 20, 30 or 50 years. So this is, again, is doable, but we have to roll up the sleeves, especially the scientists who are not dealing with engineering and other issues, but who are to deal with what I call the fluffy side, diplomacy, security, international security, arms control verification. So we need you, the right-sided people, on that. I hope it's because there is a much longer menu, but I don't see.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. In the spirit of the presentation, I'd like to take it from one of the next generation.
Hi, I'm Jeremiah Grandin with the Nunn School. I was curious where you gentlemen stand on the question of a possible knowledge gap, since we do have things like the Test Ban Treaty in place, and since there hasn't been as active of a, I guess, nuclear weapons fabrication industry since the Cold War broke down.
You're talking in particular about how do we, the U.S., for example, nuclear weapons stockpile without testing?
I mean, like worldwide, are there, I mean, do you think that, you know, with these kinds of measures and with the, you know, the slowing of the, you know, the, I guess, the diminishment of like the nuclear arms industry, do you think worldwide they're just having less people who have experience with nuclear weapons? Do you think that has a meaningful impact as far as long-term nuclear-related goals go?
Let me divide it into two parts. First, with military technologies, with nuclear weapons. Certainly for the United States, the national policy, of course, is to ensure that our nuclear weapons are usable without testing. And so and one of the serious issues, of course, is to maintain that we have the human capacity in our national laboratories that can continue with that assurance, and also the technological tools, the computational power that can essentially use simulations to make up for the fact that there is nuclear testing. So there's actually a fair amount of money and resources that are going into that, both to keep human capacity there as well as the tools that might be needed. If you look on the civilian side, I mean, that's another very important issue. You heard from the ambassador about the fact that potentially over the next couple decades there's going to be a tremendous increase in civil nuclear material, of course, which could be potentially diverted, used for weapons purposes. The nuclear industry in the United States, of course, is not many new starts going on right now. It's expanding rapidly in a number of other countries, including in China. So there's going to be perhaps a shift, and there has been worried, I know, in the U.S. nuclear industry that we have, again, the human capacity to deal with these issues with the slowdown that has occurred. I mean, with other countries, I think one of the most serious concerns is with the rapid expansion of civil nuclear power in many countries that may not have the scientific and technological capacity. How do we ensure that you know, the safety arrangements, the security arrangements are in place so those countries can do an adequate job of managing a very complicated industry. So I guess, since you said you were getting your degrees in nuclear engineering, I think it's very important that our universities and our capacity remains very strong and able in this field, both for dealing with the challenges, both from the military and.
Thank you. Before concluding, I just wanted to acknowledge Faria for making this event possible. So please thank Faria much. And also, as you're walking out, AAAS has been kind enough to leave us a number of the volumes of their most recent edition of Science and Diplomacy, so please feel free to take that. So with that, let me thank our two distinguished speakers for a very illuminating discussion and building on the spirit of the anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis and really laying out a roadmap for that the next generation. So thank you very much.